Do you know which god was so dangerous that pharaohs built artificial lakes just to avoid angering him? Which deity was so terrifying even the goddess Isis was afraid of him? And what kind of divine being was considered the lord of crocodiles and the king of all monsters? All these questions will be answered today, but first, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to never miss a new story. The Forgotten God Sobek, Lord of Crocodiles. In ancient Egyptian mythology, there existed a race of amphibious deities who ruled the waters of the Nile. They were half human and half animal, combining the intelligence and power of humans with the cunning and ferocity of crocodiles. Among them, one stood out, a supreme commander who personified the forces of nature itself. His name was Sebek, meaning crocodile, and he was known as the Lord of Crocodiles and the King of all monsters. In most cases, we don't know who exactly the Egyptians considered to be the first crocodile god, but it's believed that some early local rulers from around the 3rd dynasty, c. 2680, 26 and 10 BC, saw themselves as incarnations of Sebek. This is because many years later, during the reign of King Amenemhat III, a huge temple of the crocodile deity was constructed in the middle of a lake near Cairo. However, it seems that back then, Sebek was still far from becoming the supreme ruler of the crocodilians. His position began to rise only after the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, when Mentuhotep II unified the country around 2055 BC. He was the first ruler to build a large temple dedicated to Sebek, located in the city of Thebes. Then the cult of the crocodile god began to spread rapidly, which resulted in several other monuments being erected in his honor. But despite the fact that the worship of Sebek quickly gained momentum, the Egyptians didn't invent the image of a humanoid crocodile deity. Long before the emergence of this cult, the peoples of Mesopotamia already had a similar creature called Mushman, who was considered the husband of the goddess Tiamat and the father of all monsters. Therefore, it's possible that the ancient Egyptians learned the idea of a crocodile god from the Mesopotamians through the Akkadians and Sumerians. Another theory suggests that Sebek is just an independent invention of the Egyptians who deified the crocodile simply because it was a creature that caused fear among people living in the era of ancient Egypt. Indeed, the Nile crocodile is truly a terrible predator. Its bite force can reach up to 10,000 pounds per square inch. To put it into perspective, the bite force of a lion is only about 650 psi. Even a hippopotamus has a bite force of only 1/800 psi, while the Nile crocodile easily over 10 times that amount. Such power would definitely cause awe and terror among people. Therefore, it's quite natural that the ancient Egyptians raised the crocodile to the rank of a god. What's interesting is that although Sebek possessed tremendous power, he wasn't always depicted with weapons. Most often, the god could be seen holding lotus buds or flowers. There is even a version that initially Sebek personified not a ferocious crocodile, but a harmless heron, ibis, or even a baboon. Over time, these peaceful animals were replaced by more aggressive ones, which reflected the changing beliefs of the Egyptians themselves. In ancient times, they lived in relative peace with nature and therefore deified peaceful creatures. However, as the population grew and cities expanded, the relationship between humans and animals became more confrontational. As a result, the Egyptians began to see predators like crocodiles as divine beings. This explains the dual nature of Sebek. On the one hand, he was a god of chaos and destruction, and on the other, a god of protection and order. Another thing worth noting is that Sebek's wife was the goddess Rakis, who symbolized fertility and motherhood. It was believed that she gave birth to 50 gods, each of whom represented a different type of crocodilian. These gods were collectively called Sokar, or the offspring of Sebek. Interestingly, Sebek and Rakis weren't the only couple of crocodile gods. There were other pairs as well, such as the god Petu, his wife, the goddess Ninit, and their son Kenti Kiat. In addition, Sebek had a daughter, the goddess of childbearing and the protector of women named Tawaret. Together, all these gods formed a whole pantheon of crocodile deities. However, Sobek himself remained the supreme leader and was considered the embodiment of the life force of the Nile. This brings us to the next important aspect of Sobek's worship, his connection with Osiris. As you probably know, Osiris was the Egyptian god of the afterlife. When he was killed by his brother Set, his body broke into pieces and scattered across the country. During this journey, the goddess Isis collected all the fragments of her husband's body except for one, his penis. When Isis went to retrieve it, she was forced to ask the dragon god of the Nile Delta, the very same Sobek, for help. Sobek agreed, but only in exchange for the hand of his daughter, Ta-Wrt, for his son. Thus, Osiris and Sobek became relatives by marriage, and the latter was considered the guardian of the scales of justice in the underworld. Depictions of Sobek usually showed him as a human with the head and body of a crocodile. Sometimes he was depicted as a full crocodile, and sometimes he was shown with paws instead of legs, giving him more of a feline look. It's believed that such a combination of different animals symbolizes the duality of Sobek's essence, where the human part represents rationality and the animal part, instinct and aggression. However, regardless of how Sobek was depicted, he was always shown with a royal headdress, which emphasized his supreme power over the crocodilians. One of the most famous temples dedicated to Sobek can be found in the city of Kom Ombo. It's unique in that it's the only temple in Egypt dedicated to two gods, Sobek and Horus, the sky god. The construction of this temple dates back to the 2nd century BC and was completed under the reign of Ptolemy Thene. Although the cult of Sobek continued into the New Kingdom, its popularity waned towards the end of the pharaoh's rule. With the advent of Christianity, the Egyptians were forbidden to practice their traditional religion. And after the Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century AD, all the crocodile gods were completely forgotten. It's hard to say exactly why the worship of Sobek faded into oblivion. Perhaps it was because the ancient Egyptians gradually tamed the Nile and stopped fearing its inhabitants. Or maybe it was due to the fact that the Egyptians changed their attitude towards nature and no longer considered it divine. Whatever the reason, Sobek ceased to be revered as a powerful deity and was relegated to the category of forgotten gods. Sobek had several main temples in Egypt, but the most impressive of them was undoubtedly the one located on the island of Phyle in the middle of Lake Kare. This structure was built during the reign of Amenemhat III, king of the 12th dynasty, around 1840 BC. According to legend, Amenemhat III dreamed of Sobek, who instructed him to build a temple in his honor on an island in the middle of a lake. The king decided to follow this divine command, and in the shortest possible time, an artificial lake was created, and the Temple of Sobek was built right in its center. The construction work was carried out by skilled architects who used the latest technologies of the time. They dug canals to divert water from the Nile and then blocked them with dams. As a result, a large rectangular island appeared in the middle of the lake, surrounded by a sacred forest. The walls of the temple complex were adorned with colorful paintings depicting scenes from the life of Sobek and other gods. Inside the temple, there were several rooms containing statues of Sobek and other deities. The most revered statue was the one depicting Sobek seated on a throne with a sphinx at his feet. The Egyptians believed that this statue possessed miraculous powers and could grant fertility to barren women. That is why pilgrims from all over Egypt came to the temple to worship Sobek and ask for his blessing. Unfortunately, over time, the lake dried up and the island turned into a peninsula. Nowadays, this place is known as the Labyrinth and serves as a reminder of the grandeur of ancient Egyptian architecture. However, there are still a few things I'd like to mention. For example, unlike most other gods of ancient Egypt, Sobek didn't have a house. He was a wanderer who traveled the Nile in search of food. Sometimes he took on a human form, but most often he remained a crocodile. Another interesting fact is that the ancient Egyptians kept pet crocodiles, which they bred specifically for sacrifice. They believed that Sobek chose certain crocodiles to become his minions, imbuing them with supernatural power and making them immortal. Such crocodiles were called sacred and were revered as living embodiments of the deity. The Egyptians took special care of them, feeding them meat and guarding them day and night. It was believed that if someone dared to harm a sacred crocodile, Sobek would surely take revenge on him. If you liked this video, I recommend checking out the next one where you'll learn about another forgotten god, Anubis, the guide of souls in the underworld. But first, please hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell me, did you know about the existence of the crocodile god Sobek? What other Egyptian deities would you like to hear about? Thank you for watching. I bid you farewell.